On average, you would have to continually roll this dice for 100 trillion, trillion years before your numbers come up.
There's almost somewhat of a false dichotomy being presented in this idea that it's either entirely designed, all planned from the beginning, or a complete freak accident, and everything is just completely on the roll of the dice.
So let's hear first of all, the audio from that video, and the case I made, and the analogy I used from rolling a dice 70 times in a row for the fine-tuning of the universe for life.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Alex, and I've seen many ways that people have attempted to prove God's existence. I've seen arguments from personal experience. I've seen a whole bunch of analogies. Heck, I've even seen people try to reconcile Genesis with scientific observable evidence. But here's something interesting. This guy claims that he can prove God with nothing more than the roll of a dice. Let's check it out.
Some people say that human existence is a result of a roll of the cosmic dice.
Okay, 5 seconds in and we already have an immediate straw man. It's often said of atheists that they believe that the universe and the life within it is all some kind of freak accident. But as we'll go on to see, yes, many atheists do believe that the universe has laws and principles which govern its evolution, only that these laws came about through natural processes.
Like the gambler who stakes his life savings on the next throw, we just got lucky in the lottery of life. Some people say there's no purpose in the universe, no grand plan, no God behind it all. Our numbers just came up and here we are.
I'm worried that you're getting a bit mixed up here. You said no purpose in the universe, but I think you're committing a kind of reverse fallacy of composition, which, by the way, is a fallacy that I'm going to go into when I do my Kalam cosmological argument video. But basically, I suppose think of it this way. It may be that there's no purpose of the universe. There's no purpose of the universe as a whole. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there can't be purpose existing within it. But also, it's worth considering that, to paraphrase Richard Dawkins, the universe doesn't owe you a sense of purpose. It may be the case that there is no purpose to the universe, but unfortunately that doesn't mean that there has to be a God. You see, purpose and meaning isn't a necessary constitute of the universe.
Let's pause it there and get into just the intro to the video there. So essentially a few things that you brought up there, Alex. Is this a straw man? You know, the idea that life in the universe is a freak accident, often put to atheists. So it'd be interesting to draw that out. And this idea that, but you know, even if you can't describe an overall purpose for the universe, that doesn't mean there might not necessarily be purposes within the universe, but it doesn't owe you a purpose either, to paraphrase Richard Dawkins, as you say. Well, let's come to you first of all in response to this opening to the video here, Josh, and
sure.
see what Alex has to say in response. What's your thoughts on this idea of purpose, and is it legitimate to say that on atheism life is in a sense an accident, a freak accident, as Alex puts it?
Sure. So why we kind of separate those out. So we've got the freak accident thing, and so I think that we've got to be careful when we use analogies that kind of what are we saying the analogies are meaning. And so the idea of accident is being used in a sense to say that though this happened by chance, it's a coincidence, that kind of, it's really unlikely, but it just kind of happened, and the roll of the dice, kind of that kind of thing. And so what it's getting out, it's very unlikely. That's the idea of accident. Now, the kind of appeal that Alex made was an appeal to kind of natural processes, and the idea is that these natural processes, the way those natural processes actually are, the kind of laws we have, the special constants we have. So you mentioned later on in the video the kind of gravitational constant. We could talk about a range of others, kind of fine structure, different laws we have. But there are logically consistent universes that we can describe, which are different to our universe and don't permit life, and that we occupy a very small fraction of the universes which do permit life, and that's very surprising. And so when we talk about the kind of universe being a freak accident, I think that's actually, I think one of the kind of interesting ways that we can cash it out is say that actually what we mean by that is it's really, really unlikely that the universe kind of came out, but it's just a coincidence. I don't think that's a very compelling explanation for how the universe actually is. I think it's much more compelling that, as you argue, that there's a designer behind it all. But
I mean, is that? I mean, when people say, you know, on atheism, life is kind of an accident, do you have a problem with that fundamentally?
I'd say I do, in the sense I worry that there's almost somewhat of a false dichotomy being presented in this idea that it's either entirely designed, all planned from the beginning, or a complete freak accident, and everything is just completely on the roll of a dice.
Yeah,
there's so much that we don't know about the initial conditions of the universe. I mean, we can I say we, scientists, physicists, can view the universe and track it back to its origin to microseconds after the Big Bang, but not quite to the Big Bang itself. We have no idea what happened there and before it, and it has no relevance to our physics, because it would have no effect on us today. And so we don't know so much about cosmology. There's nothing to say that there isn't some kind of necessity for the conditions that we see in the universe. And if that is the case, then
I mean, I think we'll come back to this, because you raise this issue precisely a bit later on, and I think that's a really interesting point to make. So maybe we'll leave that one till a bit later on in the conversation. What about the issue of purpose, though? Because do you take Alex's point the universe doesn't owe you a purpose? Is that a legitimate objection as far as you're concerned?
Sure, I think so. Kind of Shelley Kagan debated William Lane Craig a number of years ago, and it's one of the atheists' favourite debates with William Lane Craig, actually, because they're like, oh, he lost this one. It's a fun one. And one of the points he makes is that, yeah, we can talk about, maybe the kind of theist wants to talk about big overall purposes to the universe. We don't actually need kind of big overall purposes. We just need kind of small purposes. We can say that, oh, my kind of life is meaningful, and I have friendships, and I have intellectual endeavours.
We make our own meaning and purpose.
So kind of, yeah, almost that kind of thing, but almost kind of slightly different to that, in that kind of making our own purpose would be saying it's kind of subjective, whereas this is saying there are kind of actual purposes and they're real things, but they're just kind of not an overall kind of cosmic purpose, but just kind of small purposes. I think that with regards to the fine-tuning argument, or the kind of design argument as it's commonly made, I don't think it's a particularly compelling response, in that we actually do think there is something special about moral agents existing, that's something that's just quite surprising, that moral agents mean that we can have certain goods which come about, so whether that's certain virtues we can display, whether the existence of certain persons, certain really amazing acts of kind of heroism and bravery and these kind of things, and those are things that even a lot of atheists, and so for example I mentioned Paul Draper, and he thinks that's a kind of really surprising and kind of quite a cool observation. It's the kind of thing that God would make if God existed. As a result, that though it kind of that you can talk about there not needing to be a purpose, it just does seem that these are kind of really special things. And so if we're going to evaluate different explanations, then we want to talk about that a design explanation therefore seems to be more relevant and have a kind of greater explanatory power than kind of any other.
The dice analogy used in fine-tuning arguments sounds convincing at first, but it oversimplifies how the universe works. In physics, events do not simply happen like random dice throws. They follow laws and natural processes. Cosmology shows that the universe developed through physical rules we can observe today, such as gravity, quantum fields, and cosmic expansion. Scientists can trace the universe back about 13.8 billion years to the early stages after the Big Bang using observations like the cosmic microwave background radiation. The claim that atheists think life is a freak accident is also misleading. Many scientists argue that life emerges when conditions allow complex chemistry to develop. Research on abiogenesis shows that amino acids and other building blocks of life can form naturally under early Earth conditions. Purpose is another point raised in these debates. The universe itself does not need an overall cosmic goal for people to have meaningful lives. Humans create purpose through relationships, knowledge, creativity, and moral choices. Meaning can exist locally within the universe without requiring a supernatural designer controlling everything.
I mean, from your perspective, Alex, you don't believe the universe has an overall purpose, obviously, presumably.
That is correct. I would refrain from saying that I believe there is no purpose from the universe, but I would say that I don't believe that there is a purpose from the universe. It's not an active statement I'm making. Oftentimes when this is put to me, people say, well, where do you find your meaning? And I can, give the typical remark of, oh, literature, music, art, it's great, make your own purpose. But to me, again, it could even be, for instance, I was a bit surprised to see it brought up in this context, actually, because I would be perfectly willing to concede that there was some kind of prime mover, some fine-tuner, but that still wouldn't mean that there was
You would be willing to concede that?
Oh, yeah, no, I mean...
Not on the basis of this argument.
Not necessarily, but I may as well state the reason I'm here is not to try and convert anybody. I'd be incredibly excited by the prospect of being turned into a Christian today.
Well, let's see what we can do.
Yeah, I mean, I am perfectly
out.
willing. I'm absolutely willing if evidence is put to me,
right?
Or compelling philosophical arguments. I am absolutely open to the idea. When it comes to purpose, though, I'd say that even if you could prove to me that there was some kind of fine-tuner, that wouldn't necessarily imply a purpose behind it. Okay, it may imply a purpose behind it, but it wouldn't prove a purpose behind it. And so to me, it's a different discussion. But you don't need purpose. It's not a necessary concept.
Do you think a fine-tuner, if there was valid evidence for that, Josh, would imply purpose or would be grounds for talking about purpose?
Sure. We should talk about kind of one of the words that kind of is brought up here. It's that you kind of both mentioned the word proof, and I think we need to be careful. Proof is a really kind of difficult word to use, and that sometimes proof is used in a sense of meaning certainty, and so I kind of use it in a kind of mathematical sense. So therefore, I'm going to prove the root 2 is irrational, and I do that by contradiction, and that's kind of showing some sort of certainty to it. I don't think we need to use the word kind of certainty in this context. Rather, we're talking about probability, and so kind of the Bishop Joseph Butler, who's kind of an Oxford man himself as well, said that probability is the guide of life, and that we can talk about probabilities here, and I think that's kind of more interesting here. And I think that if we're going to compare hypotheses, that we're saying what's going to be the thing we talk about, are we going to say it's a designer with no purpose and doesn't really care about the universe? Well, if that's the case, why are there these moral agents? And I think that's really surprising.
So for you, it's about taking not just the evidence from fine-tuning for
Yeah,
life, but
sure.
saying what sort of a thing has this produced? Oh,
Yeah.
apparently something that is moral, that has
Yes,
a
right.
particular nature, which itself suggests something about the designer
Right.
and the purposes there.
Right, yeah, and it's about when we talk about fine-tuning, we need to talk about what are we actually fine-tuning for, because another classic objection is that, okay, there are iPads exist and there are very few universes where iPads exist, but why is it we don't have a fine-tuning argument for iPads? So why is it that we're talking about
Humans.
humans? And the idea that I would present and a lot of other people would present is it's because there are these moral agents and they're kind of quite significant beings.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Well, we'll maybe come back to some of this.
Sure.
We're already at the end of our first part, and we've got a lot more video to get through, response video. So we're going to come to probabilities, especially the actual analogy I used of the dice rolling and everything, because Alex, our atheist guest, didn't feel that really was a good analogy for what we're talking about when it comes to the fine-tuning of the universe.
I thought it was a good analogy. I just thought that you were perhaps using it in the wrong way.
In the wrong way. Okay. Well, good call. But we'll come to that, and of course the actual whole point of fine-tuning is it valid as a sort of way of implying that there is a cosmic designer. So
Another important point Alex raises is about purpose. Even if someone could show that the universe had a fine tuner, that still would not automatically prove that the universe was created with a specific goal or plan. In philosophy, these are separate questions. A cause does not always imply intention. For example, natural processes produce complex systems all the time without planning. Evolution by natural selection explains how life developed complexity over billions of years through gradual changes and environmental pressures. Scientists studying cosmology also point out that we still know very little about the earliest moments of the universe. The Big Bang Theory describes expansion from an extremely hot, dense state, but it does not claim to explain what happened before that moment or why those conditions existed. Because of that uncertainty, jumping to a supernatural designer becomes a philosophical choice rather than a scientific conclusion. Meaning and purpose can still exist in human life without requiring a cosmic plan. People find purpose through relationships, creativity, knowledge, and helping others. Those forms of meaning arise within human experience and do not depend on a divine explanation.
a bit more of the response he had to the video. Here's Alex continuing with his views on the dice video, the Cosmic Dice video.
But I don't believe them, and nor should you. If I roll this dice, the chances of getting a 6 is 1 in 6. That's not too bad. But what are the chances of me rolling 6 twice in a row? Well, the odds get longer. It's 1 in 6 times by 1 in 6. That's 1 in 36. So I'd have to be pretty lucky to get 2 6s in a row. Now, every time I add the chances of rolling another 6 in a row, the odds go up exponentially, and it gets even more unlikely.
I'd be careful with the way that you're wording this. I think you might be committing another fallacy, the gambler's fallacy, or the fallacy of the maturity of chances. You seem to be implying that if you rolled 4 6s in a row, then the chances of rolling another 6 on your next turn would go down. But the chances will always be 1 in 6, no matter what you've rolled before. Each roll is independent, therefore the chances stay the same.
Now, what if I rolled this dice 70 times, and every single time I got a 6? Okay, that's pretty unlikely, but it's possible, right? Well, in fact, the chances of rolling a 6 70 times in a row are around 1 in 10 to the 55. That's a 1 with 55 zeros after it. Now, just to put that in perspective, how long would I have to stand here rolling this dice, allowing about 5 seconds per roll, before hitting that lucky streak and rolling 76s in a row? Well, I had a mathematician friend work it out for me. On average, you would have to continually roll this dice for 100 trillion, 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 trillion years before your numbers come up. That's a long time.
Now this is an accurate probability, but to anybody who thinks that this contradicts what I just said, the only reason that this probability can be applied to the entire sequence of rolling 70 dice is because we'd already decided that we wanted to roll 76s in a row. After having rolled 76s in a row, the chances of rolling another 6 would still be 1 in 6.
What if you applied that thinking to us? What are the odds of us being here? Now, the odds of rolling 76s in a row, 1 in 10 to the 55, as it happens, those are the same odds of something called the expansion rate of the universe being just right for the existence of us here today.
I'm afraid that's not quite right. You're using the right number, but you're not using it in the right way. There wasn't necessarily a 1 in 10 to the 55 chance that the expansion rate of the universe would have been what it was. Rather, you should think of it as if the expansion rate of the universe had been different by a factor of 1 in 10 to the 55, then the universe as we know it couldn't exist. Now, it might seem like this is just trivial and I'm just being pedantic, but it's an important difference, and the reason is that the case that you're presenting in the form that you're presenting it implies that there was an equal chance of different expansion rates occurring. You're saying that a slow expansion rate had the same chance as a fast expansion rate had the same chance as the expansion rate which we actually see today. But by presenting the facts correctly and simply stating that if the universe's expansion rate had been different by a factor of 1 in 10 to the 55, then the universe couldn't exist, you're not implying that different expansion rates had the same probability. It may be that the universe had to have the expansion rate that it has today. But even the fact that the universe is expanding at all is a bit of a mystery. Of course, we know it must have gotten started at the Big Bang, but the expansion rate of the universe is actually accelerating, and nobody knows why. A lot of scientists have put it down to this mysterious energy that they call dark energy, but nobody really knows what that is either. And so there's so much mystery surrounding the expansion of the universe. To make a claim that you know that the probability would have been the same for different rates of the expansion rate of the universe is nonsense. I mean, who knows? Perhaps dark energy is some kind of regulator which governs the speed of the universe's expansion. Perhaps due to some undiscovered law, the universe has to be expanding at the rate which is expanding. I don't know. But you don't know either.
There we go. It's always fun, isn't it, when you in retrospect didn't know you'd be sitting opposite the person who you'd be describing as nonsense. No, but it's fine. It's that's the nature of YouTube. It's opinionated. People like that. But I'm glad that we can come in and have the discussion about it, because there's a couple of really interesting objections you have there. The first one is kind of a sort of technical objection about the cumulative probability of rolling dice versus the fact that every time you roll a dice, it's always going to be 1 in 6 no matter what's come before, and that kind of thing. But this other one, which again we'll need to kind of get our heads around a bit, but there's a difference in your view between me saying these are the odds of rolling 76s in a row is different to saying the tolerance level, if you like, for the expansion rate of the universe is 1 in 10 to the 55. So let's come to you first on that, Josh. First of all, this first issue, is it an issue that there is obviously a difference between the cumulative number of rolls you make? If you get 76s in a row, that's 1 in 10 to the 55, but every single roll is 1 in 6. It doesn't stop the fact that the next roll is just as likely to be 1 in 6s.
Yeah, I'd say it's completely irrelevant.
No, you don't think it's irrelevant? You don't think it's relevant?
I don't think it's relevant. I'd say that because when we talk about so when you're using this as an analogy to the kind of fine-tuning of the universe as a whole, and that it is true that kind of the gambler's fallacy is just a thing that's true, but that's not what's being talked about here. Is that the analogy that's being made is between the 70 rolls of the dice and the expansion rate of the universe. And again, we don't have to talk about the expansion rate. We could talk about the cosmological constant, which is kind of between 1 in 10 to the 53 and 1 in 10 to the 120, or all these other laws. And so it's not just that law in particular. And so those are the analogies that are being made. It's between those particular fine-tunings and the probability that's assigned to kind of set 70 rolls of the dice. And so
I mean, you because we might not get time to play it later, you also mention later on in a related way, Alex, that any number of 70 rolls is equally unlikely. So any kind of combination of 70 rolls is 1 in 10 to the 55.
This is where it becomes relevant. I completely agree that on its own, that point is entirely irrelevant, and it's just being pedantic, such is the nature of YouTube. However, the reason that I decided to leave it in the video was because later I do make this point, and it's important to realise that we, of course, we ascribe meaning to rolling. I like to simplify it because it's a huge number. Let's say 4 6s in a row, like I do in the video. That is a pretty extraordinary occurrence. However, if you were to predict the numbers 2, 3, 6, 1, and then roll that
would
the
be
probability
just as
would be precisely
unlikely,
the same.
yeah.
So you're correct in the sense that if you said you wanted to roll 4 sixes, and then you roll a 6, then it's 1 in 6. But the chances then do become cumulative. That way you can then say the chances is smaller and smaller.
The thing is that in the comments section underneath my video, a lot of people made the same point. They said, but hang on, any number of combination of dice rolls over 70 is equally unlikely. Therefore, what's the big deal? What is the big deal?
So let's use an analogy, because everyone loves an analogy. So suppose we're playing poker together, and I'm kind of dealing for everyone. We're playing for quite a lot of money, and that I kind of deal you, and you guys get rubbish hands, and then I deal myself, and I get a royal flush, and I win all the pot, and we're like bet quite a lot of money. And we deal again, and I get another royal flush, and in fact I get 10 royal flushes in a row. And you guys are quite upset about this because I'm taking all your money. But I say at the end of it that you see the kind of any number of any hand that I got would be equally likely here.
So what are you complaining about?
What are you complaining about, guys? Just stop complaining. So let me explain why is that relevant. And the reason it's relevant is because we've got a specialized outcome which is special. And you're right that that any other outcome, if specified beforehand, would be special. But that's the point, is that these outcomes have been specified beforehand. So just as that kind of bank card, if I kind of took your bank card, you have a kind of random
four-digit
number, and that's kind of quite random, but it's specified because that's the number you remember. And so similarly in this universe, we've got quite a specified outcome, and the specified outcome is that life exists. And that life exists and moral agents exist, kind of the point I've made, and that I would argue that that's a kind of meaning we've discovered. It's a kind of something that morality is something we discover rather than something created. It's not something we presuppose in some sense, but is rather something we
so the reason,
discover.
If you like, the 76s are the roles that needed to happen for life to exist, let's say.
Yes,
okay,
right.
rather than for a sterile universe to exist, which couldn't support life,
Sure.
which could have existed on any other number of roles. And I guess that was the point of the sixes in a row. So I don't see where the force of the objection comes from myself, Alex, in terms of, of course, yes, we are talking about this specific combination of values in terms of the fine-tuning allows life to exist. That's why it appears special.
Yeah, a wonderful analogy you bring up. I hate to have to say it. I believe it may work in my favour. You see, the reason that a royal flush... okay, so we decide that a royal flush is special, that it has worth, before we begin playing the game.
Right.
And that way you could say beforehand, if this were to happen, if you were to present 4 royal flushes in a row, I believe you to be cheating. And then you go and do so, I would accuse you of cheating. But likewise, again, if I were to say that, if you had 4 hands in a row and I just named some random hands that had no value, and you pulled those as well, I could also have reason to assume that you were cheating. The only reason that the royal flushes are more significant is because that is significant to us. I would say that what we're doing here, like you said, I can't remember the phrasing you used, but you said that one of the sort of conditions that we sort of are working with is life existing. But of course, we only value life existing because we are life. What you're assuming is that life was the purpose before the universe began, and you're also assuming that if the universe was different, that life could not exist. But the problem is life is so poorly defined. We only have one example of life, and we have many varieties, but every single animal and living thing on this planet stems from
it's
one.
inappropriate for us to kind of say this is special because, well, we wouldn't think it was special if another roll of the dice, as it were,
Well,
had
special
come
is
up.
subjective, but yes, I suppose that's the grid of what I'm saying. I'd say, for instance, with the analogy of poker, isn't it astonishing that playing cards are so finely tuned to the game of poker? If there were more or less suits, or if there were less than 13 of each suit, the game of poker couldn't be played. How extraordinary is that? Well, it's not extraordinary at all when you realise that the game of poker was built and evolved around the cards rather than the other way around. And in fact, if the cards had have been different, if there were 5 suits instead of 4, the game of poker probably still would have evolved, but just differently.
Had a slightly different game of poker. Okay, response on that one, Josh?
Sure. So a lot of different points were made there, and so I'll try to hit those that I remember. So we've got the idea that this is kind of being, so that the specialness is subjective. I dispute that this specialness is subjective. I think it's an objective. That meaning, or morality, I would argue, is an objective thing. Moral realism is something that I kind of argue for, and just that. And so one argument for moral realism, and that moral agents, and therefore the kind of, I have this particular belief that moral agents are a special thing, and I'll kind of present some of the reasons for that. One of the reasons is kind of the argument from phenomenal conservatism, which is the idea that it's a principle by a guy called Michael Humer, and he talks about that if something seems to me to be the case, then without a reason against that, then I'm okay to accept that, and that the reason that's okay is that everything I believe is based on seemings, and that if I kind of perceive it kind of seems to me to be the case that actually that if I want to say that this kind of principle is wrong, then it seems to me to be the case that this principle is wrong, but hang on, I'm relying on a seeming to do that, so I always have to rely on seemings, and as a result I can't get away from seemings. And so similarly, it seems to me that morality is a thing, it seems to me that moral agents exist, it seems to me that pain is bad, that love is good, and all these kind of things, and so as a result I'm okay to accept that as an objective fact. And so it seems to me that these are the case, and as a result I would say that this specialness is an objective fact rather than something else entirely.
The fine-tuning argument sounds powerful, but it depends on assumptions that science cannot confirm. For example, the claim that the universe had a 1 in 10 to the 55 chance of expanding the way it did assumes that all possible expansion rates had equal probability. Cosmologists do not actually know that. Even the expansion itself is still partly unexplained. Astronomers discovered in 1998 that the universe's expansion is speeding up because of something called dark energy, which makes up about 70% of the universe, and scientists still do not know what it is. There is another problem with the argument. We only know one form of life on Earth. Because of that, scientists cannot say that life could only exist under our exact conditions. Some researchers in astrobiology even explore the possibility of silicon-based or exotic biochemistry that could survive in very different environments. When Christians present fine-tuning as proof of God, they are filling gaps in scientific knowledge with theology. History shows that those gaps tend to shrink as science advances. What do you think about the fine-tuning argument and the dice analogy? Do you find it convincing, or do you think the reasoning falls apart when you look at the science and probability behind it? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments. I read them, and I'm curious to see where everyone stands on this. And if you enjoy these breakdowns of debates and arguments, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one.